Hey there, thanks for tuning in. From the University of North Carolina at Wilmington School of Social Work, I'm Kalin Goriup.
And I'm Aishel Garcia.
And you're listening to The Hidden Homeless, a podcast created by social workers aimed at starting a conversation and raising awareness around Wilmington's housing crisis, and specifically how it affects our Latinx and Hispanic communities. So what is housing insecurity, and how is it defined? Most recently, Boating and Adams, researchers who set out in 2022 to develop and validate a housing insecurity scale in the Global South, defined housing insecurity as the lack of secure, affordable, safe, acceptable, and decent housing. Ross and colleagues in 2020 added that housing insecurity often interacts with other vulnerabilities such as poverty, exclusion, and exposure to environmental risks that compromise livelihood, safety, health, and socioeconomic development.
Salud America illustrates how U.S. Latino communities are marked by lower quality, unaffordable housing. They also face high housing cost burdens and risk of evictions and displacement. These burdens limit Latinos' access to health-promoting assets such as medical care, good schools, and green spaces, which contribute to vast health inequities in this population. The percentage of Latinos who are housing cost burdened, spending 30% or more of household income on housing costs, grew from 42.4% in 2000 to 56.9% in 2015.
Access to affordable and safe housing is a human rights and social justice issue. The statistics shared highlight a vast inequity that needs to be addressed. So today, we have the privilege of hearing from 3 different local professionals in Wilmington who work in the community in various roles surrounding housing, homelessness, diversity, and the Latinx population to help us better understand just how pervasive housing insecurity has become for the general population and why today we are attempting to shed light on the struggles the Latinx community faces. We hope that this next segment helps the general population gain insight into the ripple effects of the housing crisis. To illustrate this idea further, we are pleased to bring Katrina Knight, Executive Director of the Good Shepherd Center in Wilmington, to the podcast to tell us more about how economics play a major role in the continuation of a decades-long problem, and why the Wilmington community as a whole should be concerned.
We were describing our local situation as a crisis back in the early 2000s. Here we are in 2022, and I feel like we're sort of losing the vocabulary. When I made the same statement to someone just yesterday, they said, well, maybe it's a catastrophe. And I said, well, actually, that word is pretty fitting. It feels like a catastrophe. We just have never worked within a landscape where people who have never asked for help before are finding themselves in situations where their rental has been sold to someone else, and now they need to come up with another $500, $800 in rent every month just to stay in the place that they and their children have been in for a period of time. It is that age-old situation of not having enough income to cover the gap between what you have and what you need to have in order to obtain and hold on to housing in this very expensive community. That was true 20 years ago. It was true 5 years ago, but today it feels kind of like a runaway train. We've seen people moving away saying, if I stay here, I will never become a homeowner. Including for our modest earners, that is such a key way to build assets and generational wealth. When you talk about, people of color or people who have been disenfranchised over the generations, if they disproportionately are locked out of those opportunities, well, that's only going to make that situation worse, for future generations. As far as the Latinx community, I'm always surprised when they don't comprise a very significant percentage of our sheltered community. What Latinx clients tell us is, they are much more likely to lean on their own sort of social network. So if a family member or they fall out of housing, they're much more likely to double up or overcrowd with someone else for a period of time. So I would describe them as more often being sort of the hidden homeless, because we can only count people who actually enter into services.
As you can tell, just because we can't see a need doesn't mean that it's not there. And next up, we'd like to share some insights from Michelle Bennett, the chairperson of the Board of Directors for the Cape Fear Homeless Continuum of Care and membership secretary of the Cape Fear Housing Coalition. Michelle shares some valuable statistics with us regarding the cost of living in Wilmington and speaks to the glaring intersectionality of income, ability, and race when it comes to housing insecurity.
Homelessness doesn't operate in a vacuum. It's not a siloed event. It's rare that you find anyone who is experiencing homelessness who doesn't have some other need, some other social determinant of health. I would probably say that the top two issues are a lack of physical structures and affordability. If you have two working professionals, you can afford bare bones. I think you have to make $21 an hour to rent a 2-bedroom here. A great many of the folks who are living here in New Hanover County are cost burdened toward housing. Some of them are extremely cost burdened. A lot of times people experiencing homelessness don't have access to regular transportation. Much to my dismay, New Hanover County did not vote in favor of the transit bond that was just on the ballot, which is so unfortunate because, as the director of Wave Transit will tell you, our public transportation system is not usable at this time. Minorities are disproportionately affected with homelessness and have been for years. And certainly the Latino community, we still have a fairly substantial portion of that group that is undocumented here. And that brings an additional set of challenges to housing, to employment, to food security. Any housing assistance requires all sorts of documentation. So that pretty much rules you out of housing assistance from the beginning. Language can certainly be a barrier, trying to find forms that are appropriately translated, be it a rental agreement, be it paperwork needed to complete for Section 8 housing or for a housing voucher. Not to mention that I think there's the general perception in the undocumented population of caution and guardedness and concern that if their undocumented status is discovered, they will either be sent back to the native land that they came from, or that they will lose their job or lose their housing. And so a lot of times we find that these folks, not only in terms of housing, but aren't receiving other services just for fear that there will be retribution for their being undocumented. It's a vicious cycle. One thing comes upon the heels of the next, upon the heels of the next. And, it's a little bit of a question of how do you ever get to the point where you can start to make a dent?
Lastly, from the perspective of Jazmine Trejo, a staff member at Cape Fear Latinos, a nonprofit organization that is focused on providing social services and community aid to the Latinx population, Jazmine expands on the harsh realities that the Latinx population struggles with regarding housing, especially those that are currently undocumented, and tells us more about how Latinx women, particularly single mothers, are up against the worst of the consequences of the housing crisis.
Within the Latino community, there is a lot of negatives on asking for help, because it's like, okay, later on, if I want to fix a legal status or in any other legal thing that I have to do, this could affect me. Even though if there is resources, they decide to struggle because they're afraid.
I feel like a lot of people tend to take advantage of the Latino community because, they don't speak the same language. They don't know how things work out here. Also, there is a lot of fear because they're undocumented.
Yeah, they are susceptible to a lot of situations that can endanger them. There is a situation on a certain trailer park where the landlord pretty much makes contracts with the people that he's renting for, telling them that at the end of a certain time, they're going to own the trailer. People don't know better. They sign the contract, and that's not a legal contract. So it comes to the time where they are supposed to get the title, and then it's like, okay, you need to get out because this is not yours, it's mine. If there is an issue on the house, like we've had a situation where there was a family living in a house with mold. There was another family that was living in a trailer where the floor in the bathroom was falling down, and the landlords don't try to fix it. And that is because they're like, well, it's Latinos. I can make them wait. I don't need to focus on that.
They're not gonna say anything.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about it right now. They're not my priority because they're probably scared of saying anything or like causing trouble and like being kicked out or like anything like that.
Yeah, and that is with people that have been here for like 20 plus years. And now when it comes to people that recently got here, it is even worse. We've seen that it's been harder for single mothers. When it comes to finding a house, they have to work and they also have to take care of the kids. And we've had some situations where they don't even have the transportation. So how do they get to work? And sometimes the places that will be more affordable are far away from places where they could go to work. With that also comes making sure that they're safe. Not just the mothers, but also the kids. We had a situation where the landlord wanted to take advantage of one of the women that we were helping. So we also have to look into that.
So he was having some predatory behaviors towards the woman.
Yes. And we had to get her out of there.
In the spirit of the Social Work Code of Ethics, we as social workers have a responsibility to examine issues related to social justice and take opportunities to deepen our understanding of how social problems disproportionately affect marginalized populations and people of color. Social workers need to investigate how these populations are currently navigating their unique situations and learn what we can do to ensure help is provided and able to be accessed, to carve out a path to equal opportunity.
A responsible community, a thriving community has housing available, decent housing available for people across the economic spectrum. There is such a thing as a shared quality of life. Obviously, we're all concerned about our individual quality of life, but when increasing percentages of our neighbors, literally our neighbors, are struggling and cannot reliably get to work because they're in housing crisis, their children are suffering, teachers cannot afford to live here, other public servants or hospital workers cannot figure out the math of accepting a job here or staying here, that has an impact on the rest of us. I hope that increasingly people will begin to kind of piece that together, that it's not just a bleeding heart caring about your fellow man sort of issue. It is also a very self-interest sort of issue as well.
Taking a moment to reflect on the information we've shared with you today, our call to action is this. We ask that everyone listening pay close attention to your local politics. Look for issues related to immigration reform, landlord accountability, and housing reform laws. These are issues that informed voters should look to support among politicians. And those serving the Latinx community must be prepared to offer translation at the minimum. To go beyond language barriers, agencies should provide and expand ancillary services to the Latinx population, such as food distribution programs and outreach events, to build a relationship with the community. Joining forces as a community to attain a shared quality of life, as opposed to keeping our blinders on, can unearth a new Wilmington. A Wilmington that embraces culture, and a Wilmington that prioritizes an affordable, secure, and healthy way of living for future generations. Thank you so much for listening today.
The Hidden Homeless is a production created by social work students at University of North Carolina Wilmington's School of Social Work. This episode was edited by Britt Carpenter. Your hosts have been Kalin Goriup and Aishel Garcia. People who have helped put this show together include Carn, Kara Shaw, Tania Smith, and Ellen Tucker. A special thanks to Katrina Knight, Michelle Bennett, and Jazmine Trejo for their contribution to the podcast. Music for today's episode is from Uppbeat.io and produced by the artists Corinne and Zimpzon. We thank you for listening and hope you enjoyed your time with us.